It's Wednesday, October 7th, 2020, and we've got a little bit of an October surprise for you, the return of KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable comes to you from, well, a few different places this week. I'm in the Futures Lab studio at the Reynolds Journalism Institute, and my School of Journalism colleagues, Ernest Perry and Kathy Kiley, are socially distanced, joining from elsewhere in the school.
Hello.
Hi, Amy and Ernest. It's good to be back.
Good to be
I
back.
even brought my special Views of the News mug.
Good. I brought mine back. Mine's here too. Ernest, yours has to be there somewhere.
Yeah, it's right behind you.
To folks listening at home, you may notice, because we are socially distant, that there is a little bit of a delay when we are going ahead and communicating between ourselves. So be a little bit patient with us as we try out our new format this week. We do have a lot that we're going to be talking about. After 3 nights at Walter Reed, President Trump is back at the White House following treatment for COVID-19, but that's all we know for certain. And that's because we watched him come off of Marine One and walk up the White House steps. I'm going to ask Kathy and Ernest about the administration's intentional efforts to hold back information. Among the Trump staffers to test positive, Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany. Given her proximity to reporters and how she and so many others refused to wear a mask, now positive tests for at least 3 members of the White House press corps. And
1, 2, 3.
Netflix announced the cancellation of season 4, the final season of its hit series Glow. COVID has made shooting and producing the show impossible. We'll talk about how some of those changes are coming into play and what we're seeing as delays and pushes in production of our favorite shows and movies are having an effect on the entertainment industry. But first, let's talk about that reality show that's been unfolding in real time on our screens the past few days. From that overnight announcement that the president and first lady had contracted COVID, to the contradictory statements from doctors and Trump surrogates, to the videos that he has posted from inside Walter Reed, which could give a person whiplash, not to mention some of the tweets and the Twitter storm that has been going on in the last 24 hours. He says he's learned a lot about COVID firsthand. And then he said that it's nothing and that we shouldn't be letting it ruin our lives. Jonathan Karl covers the White House for ABC. It's a role he's had for decades. He was on The View and said this.
The sad truth is that we really can't trust at face value what comes out of the White House on this. I think we have to ask the questions, and we will continue to do so. We will try to verify all the answers that we get. But there's been so much misinformation that has gone out, about the virus, about the pandemic, about things like voter suppression. It's really hard to know what to believe, and it's a very distressing thing to say as a White House correspondent. I've had the opportunity to cover 4 different presidents, and I've been in that briefing room. I've been at the White House during some very tense moments, some moments of, where national security was at stake, and you had to depend on what was being told to you from the podium by White House officials or by the president. And with this, I think that we need to ask the questions, and then we need to verify and double verify everything we are told.
So if there is one thing that we can all agree on, it's that this administration has mastered the ability to gaslight the American public over the last 4 years. If that's being done through the differences or the changes, the lies that are told, some publications tracking that at as many as 20,000 in that time. So is there really any doubt that people are skeptical about what they're hearing now?
I don't think that there's any doubt about the skepticism that you're seeing from the public about what they're getting from the White House. I mean, it's one of those things where you'll have his doctors come out and they'll say one thing, then you'll have the chief of staff saying something else, then you'll have the president tweeting something else, and all this is happening within the span of a couple of hours. And so when people hear this and they see this, they kind of go, at this point, they're sort of like, this is sort of business as usual. I mean, this is normal. to them when you're talking about the Trump White House?
Well, I think in some ways the president is where he loves to be, which is at the center of a drama, and that is maybe makes him feel better. I think the dangerous thing here, though, is that the president obviously has supporters who believe in him and listen to what he says. He is the president of the United States. And so when he says things like, it's no big deal, that's concerning because, maybe it's no big deal for him, but there are very few people in this country who have a live-in doctor and a medical facility in their residence, and who could command the kind of, really, this was just a full court press treatment to keep the president from getting ill, which is great. But let's be honest, very few Americans would be able to get that kind of care and with that kind of alacrity. And so I think that's the danger here, I think, is that the president, and, there have been many presidents in the past who want to downplay health problems and for political reasons. But here, we're in the middle of a pandemic. It's not just his health, it's the health of many, many people. And if people follow what he's saying, it could be dangerous.
So how then, as reporters, because I even noticed this a little bit myself, depending on what source you were seeking out during the course of the last 4 or 5 days, you got a very, very different picture about what the president's situation really was, or how it was perceived by that outlet, at least, or being reported. And it wouldn't surprise anyone, we've talked about this for years, that if you were watching MSNBC or CNN, you got one story. If you were watching Fox News, it was something totally different. And if you were to have been watching CNN, even during, especially during the return to the White House to Monday evening, there was disdain. There was this idea that the president could potentially be dying. If you watched Fox News, the guy had the sniffles and everything was fine.
I think the American people are smart enough to triangulate at this point, and I do think that some of the coverage, it's almost a little unseemly. As soon as the president was diagnosed, there were stories being posted about what the succession plan was, and I thought that was a little over the top because, for many people, thank God, COVID it is a passing thing. The problem is it's kind of like a medical tornado. Some people it devastates and other people are fine, and you just don't know who that's going to be. So I think I would hope at this point that Americans are savvy enough to figure out how to find somewhere down that middle line what the right story is.
So Ernest, you were about to say something too.
No, I was gonna agree with what Kathy said. I do think that at this point the American public is pretty aware of what's going on when you're talking about the president and his administration and how things operate. And I'm pretty sure that they knew that they weren't going to get all the information. Whatever information they got was going to come to a certain lens. It was all going to fit within the parameters by which Donald Trump has talked about corona or not talked about the coronavirus. So I think this is sort of played into the pattern, and people were like, okay, this is sort of what we expect.
So there's an article on our links blog on kbia.org that suggests the president is acting a bit like a drunk driver with some of these reckless behaviors that he's been showing, and that it's time that we begin to cover him that way, that he arrived too late for the debate to be tested on Tuesday and didn't provide proof of a test. He knew he was positive when he got on a plane to go to New Jersey and go to an indoor fundraiser that ended up exposing more than 200 people. Sunday night, when he was itchy to get out of the hospital, going for a joyride in a hermetically sealed car with Secret Service agents, and then the release on Monday, and ripping off the mask while still shedding active virus. The point of this commentary is that maybe this isn't all that much different than the person who knocks back a few and drives home, maybe not intentionally setting out to hurt someone while driving, but still acting in an obviously negligent manner. Kathy, what's your reaction to that kind of a call from reporters?
Well, I mean, I think one of the problems when you cover the president is there are certain conventions of journalism where you try to make sense of something for readers. And when you do that, it does skew things kind of in favor of Donald Trump. It does cover over how irregular some of his actions are. I think certainly, my view is that the coverage of him was pretty tough. I mean, I didn't see a lot of cream puff stories about how he was handling these things. I think, as I said, I think to me the most worrisome thing is that people will, who use Donald Trump as a role model, who see him as a leader, will believe that his experience with COVID is typical. And I don't think we can emphasize enough that it's not. He got absolutely world-class care delivered in record time, and that just isn't going to happen for most Americans. So this is nothing to play with.
One of the things what I was going to say was that one of the stories that I heard this morning on NPR talked about the White House staff, and not the White House staff that works for the president, but the White House staff that works in the White House.
Sure.
And that story really talked about people who had talked about the chefs and those who take care of the housekeeping, those who handle all of the household things that happens within the White House.
Have to change the sheets.
Yeah, they are really afraid about their own health, because these are people who make somewhere between $30,000 and $60,000 a year doing these jobs, and they don't have the kind of health care that the president has, but they're exposed more so than people who are working within some of the offices that are connected to the Oval Office and that sort of thing, because they're dealing with them on a daily basis in an intimate setting. That's the story that I think really needs to get out about those people who are going to be impacted. And by and large, many of those people are African Americans, as we all know, who have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19.
And those are people who aren't also part of the administration. They aren't political in any way. They end up working from administration to administration to administration, some of those people being in those roles and in those jobs for decades at a time, without any kind of direct service to President Trump.
Right, absolutely. And so when
they're
you start
civil servants, essentially.
With all the big name people who have contracted it, the people that I was just talking about, what's going to happen to them? How are they going to be taken care of? So I think that's a huge story that needs to get out there.
So another one of the angles that came out of this was about Sunday night's car ride. It was done without notifying the pool being a group of about a dozen, Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong on that number, but about a dozen journalists that work across platforms and constantly follow the president. This is something that has been for years, for decades. Explain why it's a problem, Kathy, when the pool doesn't get notified of a situation like this.
Yeah, well, the pool is essentially the public's eyes and ears on the president, and it's a custom that's been in place for I don't know how long, many years. And the way it works is there's somebody from a wire service, somebody from a TV station, a newspaper reporter, a radio reporter, who are chosen alphabetically. Your number comes up, and you sit there and you wait, and when the president goes somewhere, you go and you report back to the entire press corps, who then can report to the nation. The idea is so the president can have some ability to move in and out of places without this huge press corps going with him. So it's really for the president's convenience. But the idea is if something were to happen to the president, you need somebody to tell people what happened. This is a credibility issue. So that's why it's important. But to get back to Ernest's point, that was one thing that struck me during that car ride is I thought, I want to know who the driver is and what kind of health insurance that person has.
And that becomes another issue, too, the number of Secret Service agents who also are available after exposures like this. Ernest, I want to tap into your historical knowledge for a few minutes in journalism history. And I want to talk about, Kathy had mentioned, this isn't the first time that a president has been sick. This isn't the first time that a president has been in a position to be critically ill. Compare this for just a minute to maybe how the media was given access, say, when Reagan was shot or when he was diagnosed with colon cancer, and how this has been handled so very differently.
Well, I think the biggest difference between Reagan's situation and what we see now is transparency. His doctors updated the press pool and the nation periodically about what was going on. It was pretty straightforward. I would say more so when the assassination attempt, more so than when he was in the hospital for the colonoscopy. But it's just one of those situations where you had a certain level of trust between the White House and the press and the public's understanding of what news and information was going to be coming out of there. You don't have that now. And everything has been politicized, polarized. So when this situation comes about, you have a skepticism on the part of not only the press, but also the public. And then at the end, when he gets out of the hospital, he gets on Marine One, he lands at the White House, and there's this sort of spectacle kind of a entrance in, and then up to the portico, ripping off the mask. People begin to look at this as if, as you said in your opening, a reality show, and not looking at it in terms of this is a serious situation in which the President of the United States has contracted a disease that has killed over 200,000 Americans.
So this raises an interesting point as we talk about that idea of there being an inherent trust that has been lost between journalists and the administration. It also presents another problem. Kathy, what happens then when our public can't trust us as the journalists and kind of transfer that lack of trust and that lack of belief onto us?
Well, I think that's one of the dangers of what's been going on. It's one reason people are so upset by the way the president's been talking about the media, because it's a systematic effort to undermine trust in this institution. But what it's really part of a bigger picture, which is global, and it's fueled by social media. And that's why I think you're seeing a lot of talk about more regulations on social media. We just had a big House report come out about that, because social media platforms, because they don't edit their content and they are not really taking responsibility for the content, have become the vectors for sowing this suspicion of institutions. And these are vectors that are being seeded by people who are against democracy, whether it's the Russian government, whether it's actors for China. But we know this is going on. We know people are vulnerable to it. We're all sitting at home by ourselves with our screens for our only companions. So I think that the fact that any leaders are sort of sowing that and fueling that makes it all the more disturbing and all the more dangerous. I mean, whether it's intentional, not intentional, people need to, if you become so cynical that you don't trust anything and you don't believe in anything, that's the end of democracy.
So at this point, we know that there are at least 3 members of the White House press corps who have tested positive for the virus. And on Monday, the White House press secretary announced that she too is positive. In her statement, which was delivered via Twitter, she said that she, quote, definitely had no knowledge of Hope Hicks's diagnosis prior to holding a White House briefing on Thursday. Yet on Sunday, she briefed reporters on the White House driveway from a distance of about 10 feet without wearing a mask. CBS reporter Ben Tracy has said that he felt physically safer reporting from North Korea. And his CBS colleague, Paula Reed, posted a photo of herself in the front row of the press briefing room, feet away from an unmasked McInerney, and another positive staffer saying that she's now in a 14-day quarantine and getting tested herself each day. So let's talk about this situation for the reporters who have been exposed just in an effort to do their job. Peter Nicholas wrote in The Atlantic about how few precautions he experienced firsthand going into the White House.
Well, I think this is something that they've been talking about for a while in the White House, about how there was just this sort of lack of COVID restrictions in terms of masks, in terms of social distancing. It was almost as if, you would go into the White House bubble, which we think of the bubble as you going in and you're doing all of these things under CDC guidelines. Their bubble was the exact opposite. So yeah, you had that kind of culture already going on, and reporters have been talking about it. But then once, you had the first lady and then the president have this diagnosis, then, all of a sudden you had reporters going, well, whoa, wait a minute, who else in the White House has contracted this, and what is my potential exposure to this? And so now you've got these tests going on, and everyone's being tested every day to figure out who doesn't have it. And I think at some point it's causing news executives to figure out who's my next report, who's next up, because I could lose someone going into the White House, and I'm going to need to figure out who I can get in there to do this. So it's kind of a crazy time right now.
Kathy, what kind of power or leverage might an organization like the White House Correspondents Association have to require what might be seen as safer work environments?
Well, very little. But I certainly, they really only have the public megaphone. There's no way I'd be going into that White House briefing room right now. It's a mold pit on the best of days. It's incredibly close quarters. And if you have aides to the president who aren't wearing masks and wandering around that room, and we know that this virus spreads by air, and it's a very close room with low ceilings. It's dangerous. The White House Correspondents Association has been making noise about this, but that's really all they can do. It's the White House is under control of the president, and you would hope that there would be some public health officials involved in setting down some guidelines, but this is a White House that is living on a big river, and it's not the Potomac, it's denial, and they don't want to do anything that would counter their narrative that this is nothing. So the reporters are in a great deal of danger, and if I were the reporter or the editor, I would be doing everything I can to stay out of there.
Okay, so there are a couple of other COVID-related topics that I wanted to bring up. I can't speak for the two of you, but I've done my fair share of binging shows on Netflix, on Hulu, on Amazon Prime. You keep naming those streaming services, especially because it seems like there's nothing new on network and cable television. And that's in part because it's been impossible to get everyone on set to shoot and produce that new content.
Fate draws us back together.
So that's from the trailer of the new James Bond movie, No Time to Die. It was supposed to premiere next month. Now it won't hit theaters until at least April. And that's leading Cineworld to close its theaters in the UK and here in the US, which includes the Regal Cinema in Columbia. I mentioned earlier that Netflix canceled the final season of Glow. CBS has even gone back to its old Sunday night movie franchise from the 80s. Daniel Craig, he's not the one who's going to be hurting in all of this, but for each Daniel Craig, there are hundreds of people behind the scenes who aren't working. There are millions of dollars being lost at the box office and ad rates that are going down for the networks as they lose original programming.
Yeah, it's interesting because CBS is now taking programs that it once had on the streaming network and moving them to network in order to cover for some of the shows that aren't going to be back until November because many of them were just now able to get back on set to start filming some of the shows that would have been pretty much at this point in week 2 or 3 of the new season.
Yeah, I'm missing young Sheldon.
Right. And so now, and when you got that, and then you got the movies which you talked about, and some of them have been moved back to 2022. So it is a real big problem right now.
And it's one that also, like we were talking about, the real people who are working in the White House. These aren't just people working on set or working in Hollywood. These are people here in our own town who are losing their jobs in our local movie theaters.
Yeah, we just did a showing of a movie about Maria Ressa that is going to premiere on PBS, and we bought the tickets in a way that they would benefit the Ragtag Theater here in Columbia. I think those theaters and live theater is something that, it's such an important part of the human experience and that creativity. And I think trying to find some way to bring live entertainment back is going to be one of the top priorities as soon as it's safe.
So ironically, there is one program that's resuming production, and that's Cops. The docu-reality show was canceled in June after the death of George Floyd because of how it was portraying the way that police were treating marginalized communities, and especially African-American males, during the course of their daily work. They're bringing it back now, but it's not going to appear on TVs here in the U.S. It's going to be produced only to fulfill contracts that Paramount has abroad. Ernest, I understand the idea of having that contract be fulfilled, but doesn't it kind of defeat the purpose of taking those images off of television if they're still being broadcast in other countries?
Personally, I think that show should have been canceled a long time ago. I don't think that it should be seen in this country or any other country, because now what you're saying is that, okay, we're going to fulfill our contracts abroad, but you're perpetuating the same kind of stereotypes about marginalized communities, in particular Black males, that is already out there. And so you're reinforcing that, and you're doing it under the guise of we have a contract to fulfill. I just don't understand it. That's just flat out wrong.
Yes, it's like exporting cigarettes.
Right.
Why are we exporting the toxins from here to other countries?
It's an interesting comparison there. And the other part of it is people who would want to watch that show are still going to find it if it's being produced through the use of a VPN or somehow finding a streaming service in another country where it may be shown. So really what that's doing is it is perpetuating everything that Paramount said that it was going to be making that act to stop perpetuating.
Why don't they make a Cops that shows community policing, that shows cops? There are a lot of cops, I think, who operate in a very different way than the macho, high testosterone, throw them down and cuff them that seems to be glorified by that program. If you could do a show that showed how cops really work or are supposed to work, maybe you'd do a good thing.
Or similarly,
to me, it's one of those things where, we're taking the tragedy and what happens in our communities and turning it into entertainment. And basically they're making money off of this. And neither cops nor those who are being marginalized and victimized see anything coming out of this.
Okay, well, that music means we're almost out of time. Thanks for joining us today. You can read about the topics we talked about on our links blog. That's under both the programs and podcast tabs at kbia.org. We're also available wherever you get your podcast downloads, including iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. Like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle there is @ViewsOnKBIA. You can watch and listen to our program again, leave us comments, questions, see previews of what we'll be talking about next week, and more. Thanks to RJI's Travis McMillan for directing today's show, Aaron Hay for handling the audio. Tim Pilcher composed our theme music. I'm Amy Simons. We'll be back with you next week.